Are you only just starting to look at Mythics and Mythic Plus dungeons and would like to learn how to make your life easier as a group leader? Well, which classes to recruit as a healer, let's say, which ones to prioritize, or which healer and DPS classes to prefer and accept into your group as a casual tank to keep things really simple. If this sounds like something that you would like a friendly advice on, please make yourselves comfortable and keep watching. Getting into Mythic and Mythic Plus dungeons progression is something a lot of even casual players end up doing in WoW, simply because without at least trying Mythic plus 0, let's say, your options of gearing and challenging yourself in WoW endgame would be rather limited actually, once you've outleveled the boring normals, heroics and LFR. We are talking about gear progression here, because a lot in WoW, not everything but a lot, is about gear progression. That is, unless you are into PvP, which is a separate system entirely, and we won't talk about that today. There is a lot that can be said about Mythic Plus system, and I'm not an expert, so I would not try and cover all of that in this video. Instead, I will just focus on literal entry point into these custom-made groups, and arguably, once again, the most important part of your introduction to Mythics and Mythic Plus: how to assemble a good, capable group, and essentially who to recruit and who to, avoid. Yes, it's very subjective, and your mileage may and will vary, yada yada. Of course it will. But statistics is still there. And today I'm sharing my own statistics and my own experience that has very clear trends of what worked better and what worked not so well. And these trends are what resulted in this list of recommendations that I'd like to offer unpretentiously in this video. Take it for what it is, and I hope you find it helpful. So, if you're brand new to Mythic and Mythic Plus, it is always better to create a group yourself rather than try and apply for one, especially if you're a healer or a tank. I know you might think, it's extra typing things up in some dungeon listing form there in the interface. But honestly, mate, unless you are 8 years old, this is hardly a massive trouble to work out how to do, and the benefits of choice that you get as a group leader will massively outweigh the trouble of pressing a few extra buttons, trust me. So when to apply for groups versus creating your own, you would ask me. Okay, I would personally only apply for groups if I'm playing a DPS class and I know that my eye level is on par or higher, or very close, in other words, to the content level that I'm applying for. For example, your Mythics plus 0 plus 2 give you, I think if I'm not mistaken, eye level 376 gear. Yeah? As DPS, you need to be very lucky to get accepted into a group, going for that kind of content, if your eye level at the moment is much below 370, let's say, simply because DPS is typically a dime a dozen. Leaders have choice, as I've pointed out above, and if you are some random mage with eye level 340 applying for my Mythic plus 2 group like someone did last night, you will be quite disappointed with the results. In every other case, sure, you could still apply for other groups, but why? It will only save you a few minutes, okay, maybe if you're lucky, but opens, the creation of the group, like I said, opens you to more freedom and reduces the random factors that you don't know what to expect from the group that has been pre-assembled to you. Enough rambling about this. I hope I sold you the main point, the main thing you need to learn and understand. And again, your mileage will vary from group to group, player to player. Sometimes you get a higher item level, but the player sucks. Yes, that's what happens, but we are working with probabilities here, yeah? So in other words, I am just about to jump and give you my very subjective, and I'm sure we will discuss it in the comments down below, list of class and spec preferences to recruit for all 3 roles when you're putting your group together, to, again, reduce your stress as a group leader in the dungeon and to make sure that your key actually gets upgraded rather than your run fails. So, if I am playing a healer and I am putting together a Mythic Plus group, let's say, yeah, I would recommend the following order of tank recruitment preferences. That is, needless to say again, let's pretend that we have a choice, several tanks applied for our group, and the item levels of those tanks are comparable. It's not like you would just say, duh, I will just pick the highest item level tank. Yeah, but here is the preference list, yeah? So, first topmost preference tank would be warrior. because of their absolutely unparalleled damage mitigation abilities. I have tanked Mythic plus 6 with a decent healer, very good group, but Mythic plus 6 in a warrior tank that was geared in the ballpark of 340. Yes, 340. Mythic plus 6. Warriors don't take too much damage to start with if they're played right, and so therefore if I'm a healer I need to heal them less and I can spend more time on the team, right? So that is what justifies my choice in this case. Then in my descending preference order after warrior would be Protection Paladin, Guardian Druid, Vengeance Demon Hunter, Brewmaster Monk, and finally Blood Death Knights. Sorry, Blood Death Knights. Now if I'm a tank, I also have an order of healer preference that I pick up for my group. Again, to work with that a little bit of a probability. Where are the chances of success higher? So first of all, at the very top, for me, like kind of just not knowing anything else about these players applying and same item levels available in the list of applicants, I would pick a Holy Priest for the very top. For the most straightforward, the most kind of easier to understand, likely good in the hands of a casual player, again applying into my group, healing class. Holy Priest wins the list for me. Definitely not discipline. And yes, you can right click on the name of the applicant and send them a whisper and ask them what spec they are. You can, and if you're nervous, you probably should. So sorry, Discipline Priest, I know there are some very good ones out there, but just like with Blood Death Knight, there are good Blood Death Knights. But majority of pickup groups, Discipline Priests struggle, at least in my experience. Then in descending order of my preference would be Healer Druid, so Restoration Druid, Restoration Shaman, Holy Paladin, Evoker, and finally Mistweaver Monk. And in any role, whichever role I play, and if I'm recruiting for the group, let's loosely go through this non-conclusive but pointing out the main kind of classes and specs here of DPS preference. This choice will vary slightly depending on the dungeon, as some classes and specs fare better against certain types of bosses. So as you get to know the content, you may have a different preference and say prefer more ranged. I also will very quickly mention here that we are talking about performance and finishing a dungeon here purely. We are not considering here the fact that if you are a clothy, you will want more clothies, because if they are overgearing content, they will give you their drops. So of course that's also logic that you may need to consider who you recruit in this particular case, but we're only talking about performance. So if I look for DPS, I would always recruit Havoc Demon Hunter as a melee DPS first. Why? Is it because they are the most peak performance and the top ranked DPS spec? Maybe not, but because they tend to pump out the most DPS versus others in an average Joe and Jane pickup group. I'd also always prefer a Devastation Evoker, believe it or not, as a range DPS these days, as it's very easy to pump out very decent to high DPS as a Devastator, even with mediocre gear and level of skill. So those two are going to be my top melee pick and top ranged pick. Then, in my descending order of preference, would be that order would be along the following lines. Slightly blurred and situational lines, I must add. Windwalker Monks pump out a lot of damage typically, so do Beastmaster Hunters, but be careful with Marksman Hunters and Survival Hunters, as those tend to vary greatly from really bad to really good ones. They are inconsistent, so that's why I'm warning you against it. I would also take a DPS Shaman, whether it's elemental, whether it's enhancement, into my most groups for utility and ability to resurrect themselves if they really need to, if they went down. That's very good. Especially I would give here an upper hand to enhancement. I've seen enhancement performing really well in early Dragonflight in most pick-up casual groups that I've been running. Then I would consider Warlocks for their Soulstone, which is fantastic, for their Cookies, which is basically a free health pot, and generally medium to quite high DPS in almost all specs, unless they are clearly sort of undergeared, but you wouldn't be picking those people into your group if you're putting your group together, would you? Retribution Paladins and DPS Warriors, whether it's Arms or Fury, can be a hit or a miss in my experience. So they are not in my sort of top kind of handful of, I guess, the preference. So they're sort of towards the middle, but they're not the worst ones, for sure. They're not. And yes, sometimes they all surprise us with massive burst and all that kind of stuff, but most classes can do that. I will mention the rogues somewhere here below Retribution Paladins and Warriors towards the bottom of my preference list, because they also can be hit or a miss. With high eye level rogues could bring an insane DPS. I had a group of like Mythic plus 2 where a rogue was pumping out 70k. 70, okay, of DPS, which was insane, right? But they bring virtually no utility other than skipping some trash with their invisibility shroud for a group that, yes, can be useful, which matters in some tightly timed Mythic Plus runs, I suppose, but probably not so much for lower keys or you know, for Mythic plus 0, Mythic plus 2, Mythic plus 4, whatever. I was also not very lucky with most Death Knights. I'm sorry, it sounds like I'm picking on Death Knights. It's just the truth I'm sharing of my experience. Tell me in the comments down below about yours. But I was not very lucky with most DPS Death Knights I've recruited. Had higher chances of success with Blood Death Knights, to be honest. They are a pass mark most of the time, but less predictable than Paladins or even Warriors, which is why, if it's a preference list, why pick them? I'm sorry. Sad to say, but the worst of the lot, in my experience so far, would be Shadow Priests, yes. I have a very good friend who plays a Shadow Priest on and off and absolutely melts faces, but he's an exception from the rule, and I ran dungeons all the time, and when a Shadow Priest was in a dungeon, that group that I didn't put together, let's say, or in a random pickup group or whatever, it didn't look pretty. Yeah, it didn't look pretty. Their DPS kinda generally sucked, especially if we compare it to others. And that's basically all I wanted to say in relation to getting used to putting together groups for your Mythic and Mythic Plus runs, my friends. Because at the end of the day, when you put together this group, you put your faith of success into people you've never met before. So going with this order of preference, again, it's not an absolute order of preference. Some other player might share some other insights with you. But these classes are generally the classes at the top of my list for healers, for tanks, for DPS, are generally tending to do better, and they're generally performing better in less skilled hands is most important. Kind of what is the ultimate reason Gyro is picking this. So that is what the reason is. So I hope this very loose guide was of some help to you. So please give me a like if it was, and subscribe for more similar guides from me. I'll thank you for watching, and I will talk to you next time.
I am sorry, Air. I have failed you.